you are afraid of something, perhaps many things. You lie awake rehearsing disasters that may never arrive, or you move through your days avoiding difficulties you know you should face, or you have built your entire life around the circumnavigation of certain pains you cannot bear to feel. Do not be ashamed. This is the universal human condition. I have known it myself in dark hours when what I call the black dog descends and every action seems pointless, every effort doomed. But I have also discovered something that changes everything. The things you fear are not what you think they are. The suffering you flee is not simply suffering, it is the raw material of your own transformation. The difficulties you avoid are not obstacles to the life you want, they are the very means by which that life becomes possible. You have been running from the one thing that could make you free. I do not ask you to seek out misery or to glorify pain for its own sake. I ask only that you consider the possibility that you have fundamentally misunderstood your relationship with difficulty, and that this misunderstanding has cost you more than you know. What follows is the correction of that error. What follows is the path from fear to freedom, from avoidance to strength, from the fragile life to the unbreakable one. Come, let us begin. I have observed, in a life spanning wars and parliaments, triumphs and disasters, one consistent pattern that governs human failure more reliably than any other. It is not stupidity that ruins men, nor wickedness, nor even bad fortune, though all these play their parts upon the stage. It is rather a subtler poison, one that presents itself in the guise of medicine, the relentless pursuit of comfort. You must understand what I am saying, for I do not speak carelessly. The very strategies you employ to feel better, avoiding confrontation, fleeing from challenge, cushioning yourself against disappointment, these are the strategies that guarantee your eventual collapse. They do not strengthen you, they weaken you. They do not prepare you for difficulty, they ensure that difficulty, when it arrives unbidden, shall find you defenseless. This is not pessimism, this is diagnosis. I recall a young lieutenant I observed during my service in India, a man named Harrington, born to wealth and shielded from all unpleasantness since the cradle. He arrived at Bangalore with every advantage except the one that mattered. He had never learned to suffer. His first encounter with genuine hardship, a punishing march in summer heat, did not test his character. It revealed he had none to test. He collapsed not from physical weakness, but from spiritual inexperience. The kindnesses of his upbringing had been cruelties in disguise. Contrast him with Sergeant Morrison, a man risen from the working quarters of Birmingham, who had known cold and hunger since boyhood. Morrison faced the same march with a steadiness that seemed almost supernatural. Was he stronger in body? He was not. Was he braver in temperament? Perhaps, but that bravery had been built through countless small difficulties that Harrington had been protected from experiencing. Morrison had developed what I call the musculature of the soul. Harrington had not. Now consider this principle as it applies to your own existence. When did you last voluntarily do something difficult? If the answer requires significant searching of memory, you have been poisoning yourself with comfort. The body develops immunity through controlled exposure to disease. Eliminate exposure and you eliminate immunity. The soul operates identically. You flee from small pains and guarantee your destruction by large ones. You avoid manageable challenges and ensure you shall be overwhelmed by unmanageable ones. There are 3 false refuges to which people flee when difficulty approaches. The first is avoidance, pretending difficulty does not exist. The second is rage, demanding that difficulty should not exist. The third is collapse, believing that difficulty proves you cannot exist. All 3 responses guarantee suffering without growth. None produce the strength that difficulty rightly met can forge. What, then, is the alternative? It begins with recognition. When you next face a minor difficulty, a tedious task, an uncomfortable conversation, a physical inconvenience, observe your immediate impulse. Do you seek to escape, postpone, or delegate? That impulse is the comfort addiction revealing itself. Instead of obeying it, pause. Ask yourself, what would happen if I moved toward this difficulty rather than away from it? Begin with small matters. The cold morning when you wish to remain abed, rise immediately. The letter you dread writing, write it first. Each small victory builds capacity for larger ones. I do not ask you to seek misery for its own sake. That would be morbid and perverse. I ask only that you stop fleeing from necessary difficulty. The distinction matters enormously. One approach is masochism, the other is mastery. One produces damaged souls who glorify suffering. The other produces capable souls who can bear what must be borne. You must learn the difference if you wish to grow rather than merely survive. Here is the distinction upon which everything else depends, and it is a distinction that most people never make. Suffering is not a single phenomenon, but two entirely different experiences wearing the same mask. There is suffering that destroys and suffering that develops, suffering that scars and suffering that strengthens. The same fire hardens steel and melts wax. The difference lies not in the fire. I learned this truth during the Boer War, where I observed two officers face identical circumstances, captured, imprisoned, facing uncertain fate. One emerged from captivity broken, haunted, diminished for the remainder of his days. The other, and here I speak from intimate knowledge, emerged with strengthened resolve, sharpened faculties, and unshakable confidence. Same prison, same guards, same uncertainty. Radically different outcomes. What differed was not the suffering, but the meeting of it. The man who was destroyed had met his captivity with three responses, each fatal to growth. First, resistance, fighting against what could not be changed. Second, denial, pretending the painful reality was not real. Third, self-pity, making himself the center of a tragedy. All three responses trapped him in suffering without allowing growth to occur. He spent his energy against the bars rather than strengthening himself within them. The man who was developed, and I confess I speak of myself, met the same captivity with three different responses. First, acceptance, acknowledging what was rather than what should have been. Second, inquiry, asking what could be learned from circumstances I had not chosen. Third, action, focusing on what remained within my power rather than lamenting what did not. These responses transformed identical circumstances into a crucible of development. The difference was not in the suffering. The difference was in the meeting. You must understand that suffering, like food, must be metabolized to nourish. Food that passes through undigested provides no sustenance. Suffering that passes through unprocessed provides no strength. The processing is the key, and processing is a skill that can be learned. It begins in the first moments of meeting difficulty, those crucial initial seconds when you choose, consciously or not, how you will respond. Choose wrongly and you set a course toward destruction. Choose rightly and you set a course toward development. Here, then, is the practical method. When difficulty arrives, train yourself to pause before reacting. In that pause, ask three questions in sequence. First, what is actually happening? Not what you fear is happening, not what you wish were happening, but the actual facts as they stand. Second, what can I learn from this? Every difficulty contains instruction for those willing to receive it. Third, what can I do? Focus your attention on available action rather than unavailable escape. This sequence, acknowledge, learn, act, transforms the meeting of difficulty from destructive to developmental. Do not confuse acceptance with approval. You can accept that something has happened without endorsing that it should have happened. One can accept a wound whilst working vigorously to heal it. Do not mistake numbness for equanimity. Suppressing feeling differs entirely from processing feeling. Surface calm that covers inner turmoil is theater, not transformation. The power this distinction grants you cannot be overstated. When you truly grasp that the same suffering can destroy or develop depending upon how it is met, and that how it is met lies within your control, you have gained mastery that most people never achieve. Difficulty remains difficult. Pain remains painful. But neither need remain meaningless, and neither need leave you weaker than before. Here is an uncomfortable truth that our age of instant gratification refuses to hear. How you will handle tomorrow's crisis is being determined by how you handle today's comforts. The soul is always being shaped, always being trained, always developing capacities or losing them. This shaping occurs primarily in ordinary moments, not dramatic ones. By the time the great test arrives, the preparation is already complete. I think of my years in the political wilderness, 1929 to 1939, when my warnings about the Nazi menace were derided and my career appeared permanently finished. Those years seemed wasteful at the time, a great energy with no worthy outlet. Yet I now see they were essential preparation. I studied, I wrote, I observed, I developed convictions that could not be shaken because they had been tested in isolation. When the crisis finally came in 1940, I did not rise to the occasion. I had prepared for the occasion through a decade of unrecognized training. The wilderness was not interruption, but instruction. And so it is with every period of your life that seems fallow or frustrating. You are being prepared for something you cannot yet see, if, and this is the crucial qualification, you use the time rightly. The man who complains through his wilderness learns only to complain. The man who prepares through his wilderness emerges ready for what follows. Consider the implications of this principle for your daily existence. Every response to every minor difficulty is practice for major difficulty. The woman who maintains equanimity over small frustrations is training herself to maintain equanimity when tested seriously. The man who complains about cold weather is training himself to complain when genuine crisis arrives. You are always practicing something. The question is whether you are practicing what you wish to become. I call this the invisible training principle, and once you grasp it, you cannot ungrasp it. You see that the delayed train is not merely an annoyance, but a training opportunity. The impertinent remark from a subordinate is not merely an insult, but an examination you have chosen to take. The unexpected change of plans is not merely inconvenience, but practice for the greater disruptions that life inevitably delivers. Pass enough small examinations, and you will be ready for larger ones. There is a capacity I have found invaluable, the ability to watch oneself responding to difficulty, as if observing another person. This observer position creates space between stimulus and response. In that space lies freedom to choose your response rather than merely react. Most people have no such space. Stimulus produces response as automatically as flame produces heat. But the space can be cultivated. It grows wider with practice until you possess genuine choice in the face of any circumstance. Begin today. Treat every minor frustration as practice for major trial. When morning brings inconvenience, say inwardly, "This is practice. How would I wish to respond to genuine crisis? Let me practice that response now." When afternoon brings its irritations, repeat the process. Within a fortnight, you will notice your automatic responses beginning to shift. Within a year, you will possess resilience that others mistake for natural temperament. But it is not natural. It is trained, and you are the trainer. I wish now to give you an image that will illuminate everything that follows, an image I encountered during my travels in Spain, where I observed a master swordsmith at work in Toledo. Watch him with me, for what he does with metal is precisely what life does with souls, and understanding his art is understanding your own transformation. The smith takes raw iron, dull, brittle, unremarkable, and subjects it to fire, not gentle warmth, but genuine flame, heat sufficient to make the metal glow and soften. Then comes the hammer, strike after strike, each blow shaping what the fire has made malleable. Then the quenching, sudden immersion in cold water that locks in the new form, and then the process repeats. Fire, hammer, quench. Fire, hammer, quench. Each cycle refining what came before until raw ore has become tempered steel, beautiful and strong. Now here is the crucial point. The smith does not merely subject metal to fire and hope for the best. He knows precisely how hot, how long, when to strike, when to cool. When I asked the Toledo master how he knew these things, he replied that the metal told him if he listened. Poor smiths, he said, impose their will on metal. Master smiths enter into dialogue with it. The metal's resistance, properly understood, guides the smith's hand. You are simultaneously the blacksmith, the forge, and the metal being shaped. Suffering is the fire and hammer. The product is character, stronger, more useful, more beautiful than raw ore could ever be. But you must learn the blacksmith's art if your suffering is to produce steel rather than slag. You must learn to read your own metal, to know when you can bear more heat and when you require cooling, when to strike and when to rest. Consider the heat principle. Transformation requires genuine challenge, difficulty that costs something, that stretches capacity beyond its current limits. Difficulty that costs nothing teaches nothing. But excessive heat destroys rather than transforms. There is a point beyond which the metal does not strengthen, but shatters. The art lies in finding the range between too little and too much, and that range differs for each person and shifts as capacity develops. Consider next the striking rhythm. Growth occurs not in continuous pressure, but in rhythmic alternation of stress and recovery. The hammer strikes, then lifts, the metal endures, then rests. Constant, unrelieved pressure produces brittleness, not strength. I have seen men break not because their challenges were too great, but because they permitted themselves no recovery between challenges. They forgot that the lifting of the hammer is as essential as its fall. Finally, consider the quenching moment. There comes a time when heat must be followed by rapid cooling, when the insight gained through suffering must be locked in through deliberate consolidation. Miss this moment, and the transformation fails to set. The metal returns to its previous softness. When you have passed through a difficulty and emerged with new understanding, consolidate that understanding. Write it down, speak it aloud. Teach it to another. The quenching fixes what the fire and hammer have shaped. When facing your next difficulty, apply these principles consciously. Ask, is this challenge genuinely stretching me or merely uncomfortable? Am I allowing recovery between periods of stress? What insight is emerging that needs consolidation? You possess all the tools required. You need only learn to use them. The forge metaphor illuminates the art of transformation, but I wish now to show you the mechanism, the actual process by which difficulty produces strength. This is not philosophy but physiology, and understanding it will remove any lingering doubt that growth through suffering is mere poetic fancy. I observed some years ago the training regimen of a champion oarsman preparing for Henley. His coach demanded exertions that seemed cruel, requiring more when muscles screamed for rest, pushing beyond what appeared possible. I asked whether such treatment were not harmful. The coach explained what I have never forgotten. Each session broke down muscle fiber. Each recovery rebuilt it stronger. The pain, he said, is not the cost of strength. The pain is the mechanism of strength. This is not metaphor, but biology. Muscle fibers grow only when torn. Bones strengthen only when stressed. The immune system develops only through exposure to threat. Controlled damage followed by repair produces structures stronger than before. The body has known this truth since the beginning of life on earth. We merely discover what was always so. The soul operates identically, though we have refused to acknowledge it. The courage you admire in others was not born but built through countless small confrontations with fear. The resilience you envy was not gifted but forged through difficulties met and metabolized. The wisdom you seek was not revealed but earned through errors examined and corrected. These qualities cannot develop except through the application of their opposite. Fear builds courage. Difficulty builds resilience. Error builds wisdom. Consider what I call progressive overload. Growth requires challenges slightly beyond current capacity, not so far beyond as to crush, not so close as to merely maintain. This growth zone must be found and inhabited regularly. The weightlifter who lifts the same weight endlessly maintains his strength but does not increase it. The soul that faces only familiar difficulties maintains its capacity but does not expand it. You must continually find the edge of your ability and push just past it. But here is what most people miss. Growth occurs not during stress, but during recovery from stress. The oarsman does not grow stronger whilst rowing. He grows stronger whilst resting after rowing. The torn fibers rebuild during sleep and nourishment, not during the tearing. This means recovery is not weakness but completion of the growth cycle. The man who permits himself no recovery never grows. He merely exhausts himself and calls exhaustion discipline. There is also specificity to consider. The capacity you develop depends upon the challenge you face. Physical challenge develops physical resilience. Emotional challenge develops emotional resilience. You cannot strengthen your capacity for uncertainty by facing only certain situations, nor your capacity for criticism by facing only praise. You must train the specific capacity you wish to strengthen, identifying your weakest areas and directing appropriate challenge toward them. Here, then, is your method. Identify the capacity you most need to develop. Perhaps tolerance for uncertainty, perhaps ability to handle criticism, perhaps persistence through tedium. Design a training regimen that provides progressive challenge in that domain. Start with challenges you can handle with effort. Then gradually increase difficulty as capacity grows. Ensure adequate recovery between sessions. Track progress over months, not days. This systematic approach transforms random suffering into directed growth. You become not merely someone who endures, but someone who develops. That is the difference between the victim and the athlete of the soul. I have spoken thus far of suffering that can be transformed. Suffering that, rightly met, becomes the raw material of strength. But I should be a fraud and a coward if I did not now address what the previous chapters could not. The suffering that admits no ready lesson, no clear purpose, no satisfying refrain. The death of a child. The betrayal by one deeply trusted, the loss that leaves no silver lining visible from any angle. I shall not insult you with false comfort. I speak now of Marigold, my daughter, who died at 2 years of age. There was no lesson in her death that could compensate for her loss. There was no growth opportunity that made her absence worthwhile. There was only grief, and the necessity of continuing to live with grief as a permanent companion. I do not pretend to have mastered this loss. I pretend only to have survived it. And survival, when survival is all that is available, is itself a form of victory. You must understand the distinction I am making. Some suffering is to be transformed. Some suffering is simply to be borne. Knowing which is which prevents two opposite errors, treating bearable suffering as unbearable and forcing meaning onto meaningless loss. The first error produces premature surrender. The second produces false positivity that dishonors genuine tragedy. Both are failures of perception. When you face loss that cannot be reframed, the practice is not transformation, but carrying. Grief cannot be rushed or resolved. It can only be carried. The weight does not decrease with time, but your capacity to carry it increases. This is not the same as the weight becoming lighter. It is the bearer becoming stronger. The distinction matters, for it offers hope without false promise. You will not cease to grieve. You will learn to grieve whilst continuing to live. There is also what I call the integration path. What cannot be resolved must be woven into the fabric of ongoing life rather than cordoned off in a separate compartment. The loss becomes part of who you are, not an interruption to who you are. Marigold is not a chapter I have closed, but a presence I carry forward. She shapes my understanding of what matters, my compassion for others who have lost children, my awareness that time with those we love is borrowed, not owned. Here, then, is practical wisdom for the suffering that resists transformation. First, abandon the search for meaning. It insults both the loss and your intelligence. Second, accept that grief has its own timeline that will not be hurried by your impatience. Third, attend to the basic requirements of continued existence: sleep, food, movement, human contact, not because these will heal you, but because they will sustain you whilst time does its slow work. Not a leap, merely a step. Fifth, allow others to help carry what you cannot carry alone. This is not weakness, but wisdom. Sometimes the only way to honor profound loss is to live well despite it, not to forget, not to move on, as the callous phrase suggests, but to carry the lost one forward into a life they would have wanted for you. This is the final form of love, to live in a way that honors what was lost. The goal is not triumph, but survival. And survival is triumph enough. I must now tell you what our impatient age most needs to hear and least wishes to accept. The deepest transformations cannot be rushed. Just as the oak cannot be hurried into maturity, so the development of genuine character requires seasons, many seasons, of growth. Those who demand immediate results guarantee superficial results. Those who can sustain effort across years achieve what hasty strivers cannot imagine. Consider my own development as a writer and speaker. My first speeches were embarrassments. My early writings were rejected by publishers who saw no promise in them. Had I demanded immediate mastery, I should have abandoned both pursuits before achieving competence, let alone excellence. Instead, I accepted that the craft required years of practice, thousands of pages written, hundreds of speeches delivered. Each failure was a lesson. Each year brought improvement, invisible in the moment, but unmistakable across decades. What appears to others as natural gift is actually patient accumulation. The fluency they admire was purchased with stammering attempts they never witnessed. The confidence they see was built upon foundations of doubt they never knew. There is no shortcut. There is only the long road, and those willing to walk it. Here is a principle I call compound interest of character. Small, consistent efforts compound over time into results far exceeding what dramatic short-term efforts could achieve. The tortoise truly does defeat the hare. In character development, as in fable, a man who improves 1% each day will, within a year, be unrecognizable from who he began. But the improvement must be daily, and it must be patient. You must also understand the plateau, that peculiar feature of all genuine development. Progress is not linear but stepped. Long plateaus of apparent stagnation precede sudden leaps forward. Those who quit during plateaus never experience the leaps. Those who persist through plateaus find their patience rewarded. I have seen this pattern repeat so consistently that I treat it as natural law. When you feel you are making no progress despite continued effort, you are likely approaching a breakthrough. The plateau is not evidence of failure. The plateau is preparation for advancement. Ask yourself not what you can achieve in a week or month, but what you could achieve in 10 years of sustained effort. This shift in time horizon transforms both what seems possible and how you allocate daily attention. The decade is the natural unit of significant transformation. Think in decades, act in days. There is a paradox here worth noting. Patience with results combined with impatience with effort produces optimal outcomes. Be patient about when transformation will arrive. Be impatient about showing up to practice daily. Many people have this precisely backwards. They are impatient for results whilst being patient about making effort. They wonder why nothing changes. Nothing changes because they have confused waiting with working. I wish now to teach you an art that separates those who merely endure failure from those who extract its full value. The art of failing productively. Most people seek to avoid failure entirely. The wise seek to fail quickly, cheaply, and instructively. Failure is inevitable. Wasted failure is optional. Every defeat contains, encoded within it, the information needed for future victory, but this information must be actively extracted through disciplined analysis. Let me speak of Gallipoli, not as tragedy, though tragedy it was, but as tutorial. Every major error I made in that campaign taught me something essential I would need 25 years later. My underestimation of Turkish resistance taught me never to underestimate opponents again. My optimistic timelines taught me to plan for delay and disappointment. My insufficient coordination between services taught me the absolute necessity of unified command. Had I not failed so spectacularly at Gallipoli, I could not have succeeded in 1940. The failure was the education. But the education was not automatic. I had to extract it deliberately. And here is the method. After every significant failure, conduct a formal analysis. What happened? Why did it happen? What will I do differently? This must be done in writing, for writing enforces precision that mere thought does not. The mind can slide past uncomfortable truths. The page holds them fixed for examination. You must also distinguish between types of failure. Intelligent failures, trying something new that did not work, deserve reward, for they produce learning impossible to gain otherwise. Negligent failures, repeating mistakes already made, deserve correction, for they indicate refusal to learn. Never punish intelligent failure in yourself or others, for doing so eliminates the experimentation upon which all progress depends. Punish only negligence, the failure to learn from what has already been demonstrated. There is strategic wisdom in seeking early small failures rather than avoiding all failure until a large one becomes inevitable. The enterprise that permits no small failures guarantees eventual large ones. Test your assumptions early, when the cost of being wrong is low. Discover what does not work whilst you still have resources to try what might. The generals who refuse to conduct reconnaissance because scouts might be lost guarantee larger losses when the army advances blind. Begin maintaining what I call a failure journal. For each significant setback, record precisely what occurred without self-justification or excessive self-blame. Identify the specific decision or action that produced this outcome. Determine what you will do differently in similar future circumstances. Note what you could only have learned through this particular failure. Review your journal quarterly, seeking patterns. These patterns reveal your characteristic blind spots, the recurring errors that, once identified, can be corrected. You will transform failure from enemy into instructor, from wound into wisdom. I turn now to the most formidable adversary in any campaign of self-improvement. More dangerous than external obstacle, more cunning than any human opponent. I speak of the enemy within, that voice which counsels delay, whispers doubt, and manufactures excuses of such plausibility that we surrender without recognizing we have surrendered. This enemy knows us intimately. It knows our fears, our weaknesses, our secret desire to remain comfortable. Until this enemy is understood and defeated, all external victories remain temporary. I have battled this enemy my entire life. I call it privately the black dog. Those periods of profound despondency when the will to continue seems to vanish and the voice of surrender speaks most persuasively. I have learned through decades of intimate warfare that the black dog lies. Its assessments of hopelessness are not accurate reports, but tactical maneuvers designed to force retreat. The darkness it describes is not the actual world, but a distortion created to serve its purposes. I have learned also that action defeats the black dog more reliably than argument. When that voice speaks, do not engage it in debate. You cannot argue your way to motivation. Instead, act. Do what must be done despite the voice urging otherwise. Action eventually silences what argument cannot touch. The black dog is not to be negotiated with, but to be disobeyed. Learn to recognize resistance's favorite disguises, for it rarely announces itself honestly. It speaks as reasonable caution, perhaps tomorrow would be better. It speaks as perfectionism, I am not quite ready. It speaks as wisdom, let me think about this more. These phrases sound sensible. They are not. They are resistance wearing borrowed clothes. The moment you hear them, know that you have identified the enemy. Here is a truth that transforms everything. You can feel reluctant and act anyway. The common assumption that you must feel ready before acting has it precisely backwards. Action typically precedes and produces the feeling of readiness. You do not wait until you feel like writing to write. You write until you feel like writing. You do not wait until courage arrives to act courageously. You act courageously until courage arrives. Feeling follows action far more reliably than action follows feeling. When resistance seems overwhelming, negotiate with it thus: I shall do just 5 minutes. Resistance often yields to minimal commitment, and minimal commitment often becomes sustained effort once begun. The first stroke of the brush is the hardest, the second follows more easily, the third flows naturally. Break resistance's hold with the smallest possible action, then allow momentum to carry you forward. Map your resistance's patterns, the times of day when it speaks loudest, the types of tasks that trigger it, the circumstances under which it gains power. With this map, you can predict and prepare for its attacks rather than being ambushed by them. The enemy you can see coming is an enemy half defeated. I turn now from principle to application, from the forge of theory to the workshop of daily practice. Let us examine how the wisdom we have developed transforms professional existence, that arena where most people spend the majority of their waking hours and encounter the majority of their difficulties. Work inevitably involves setback, criticism, and failure. The question is whether these difficulties defeat you or develop you. Consider the careers of Disraeli and Lincoln, two men who achieved the highest offices in their respective nations and whose paths to those offices were paved with failure. Disraeli was dismissed as a flashy foreigner, defeated repeatedly at the polls, ridiculed by those who considered themselves his betters. Lincoln lost election after election, endured devastating personal criticism, was dismissed as a backwoods simpleton unfit for high office. Both men understood what their detractors did not, that each failure was tuition toward eventual mastery. Their persistence was not stubbornness, but strategy, grounded in the knowledge that defeat properly metabolized becomes development. They learned from every rebuff. They refined their approaches. They emerged from each setback better equipped for the next challenge. When finally they achieved power, they wielded it with wisdom unavailable to those who had never known failure. Here, then, is your method for professional difficulty. When setback occurs, ask immediately, what information does this contain? Not, why is the world unfair, but what can I learn? This single reframe transforms setback from wound into wisdom. The project that fails teaches what does not work. Invaluable knowledge impossible to gain otherwise. The promotion denied reveals either what capacities require development or what circumstances require changing. Extract the lesson, discard the self-pity. When criticism arrives, and in any professional life of significance, criticism arrives regularly, receive it with a single question. Is there any truth in this I need to hear? often there is, buried beneath delivery that makes it hard to hear. The critic may be hostile, the criticism may be poorly expressed, but within the attack may lie genuine information about your blind spots. Extract whatever truth exists, discard the rest. This approach extracts value even from malicious feedback whilst protecting you from internalizing unfair attack. Adopt what I call the long view. Evaluate professional events not by their immediate pleasantness, but by their contribution to long-term development. A comfortable position that teaches nothing may be worse than a challenging position that teaches much. The assignment that stretches you past comfort serves your development better than the assignment that lets you coast on existing competence. Choose growth over ease. Choose difficulty that develops over comfort that stagnates. Remember this: in any field, those who can handle difficulty productively outlast those who cannot. Time eliminates the fragile. Persistence and resilience ultimately triumph over brilliance without staying power. Your capacity to grow through professional difficulty is not merely an advantage, it is the advantage, the one that compounds across a career whilst other advantages fade. I turn now to the most intimate application of our principles, the development that occurs through committed partnership. Marriage is the most demanding of human institutions, precisely because it permits no comfortable distance. Two people who bind their fates together will inevitably disappoint, hurt, and frustrate each other. The question is not whether wounds will occur, but whether they become occasions for growth or grounds for separation. I speak from experience of my own marriage to Clementine, a partnership that has survived war, political exile, financial strain, profound differences of temperament, and the death of a child. We have wounded each other countless times. We have also healed each other countless times. What has sustained our union is not absence of difficulty, but capacity to use difficulty productively, to allow each friction to reveal something needing attention, each conflict to clarify something requiring resolution. The great illusion that destroys marriages is the belief that love should feel pleasant at all times. This illusion has ended more unions than infidelity. When the inevitable friction arrives, those holding this illusion interpret it as evidence that the relationship is wrong, that they have chosen the wrong partner, that love has died. They are mistaken. Friction is not evidence of failure. Friction is the heat through which two people are forged into one unit. Absence of friction often indicates not harmony but distance. When your partner frustrates you, and they will, for all partners frustrate, ask yourself, what does this reveal about me that I need to see? Often our strongest reactions to partners reflect our own unresolved matters more than their actual faults. The irritation you feel at their lateness may reveal your own anxiety about control. The hurt you feel at their distraction may reveal your own fear of abandonment. The partner becomes a mirror. What you see in that mirror is frequently yourself. Successful partnerships are not those that prevent all rupture, but those that have developed robust repair. The question is not, did we hurt each other, but can we heal what we have hurt? Couples who can say, that was terribly painful, and now let us discover what it teaches us, will outlast and outgrow couples who merely catalog injuries. The capacity for repair matters more than the prevention of damage, for damage cannot be prevented entirely. Only repair can be cultivated. The highest form of partnership is mutual development, where both people commit to helping each other grow, even when growth is uncomfortable. This requires both courage and humility. Courage to offer difficult truths your partner needs to hear, humility to receive difficult truths you need to hear. Such partnerships are forges in the truest sense. The fire is genuine, the transformation is genuine. The love that emerges is stronger than the love that entered. Love that has never been tested is not love, but infatuation. Love that has passed through fire knows itself and its depths. If you would have a partnership worthy of the name, do not flee from its difficulties. They are not obstacles to love. They are the medium through which love develops. We come now to our responsibility toward others, particularly the young, and how we might help them develop the capacity to grow through difficulty. The parent who shields a child from all disappointment cripples that child as surely as if they had broken his legs. The mentor who makes everything easy for a protege guarantees that protege's eventual failure when difficulty inevitably arrives. Yet the balance is delicate. Excessive protection produces weakness. Excessive exposure produces damage. I observed 2 approaches to education at Sandhurst that illustrated this balance perfectly. One instructor made every exercise as easy as possible, believing he was helping cadets succeed. His cadets passed examinations with high marks. They failed in combat, having never developed capacity for genuine difficulty. Another instructor made exercises genuinely challenging, accepting higher failure rates in training. His cadets struggled during preparation. They excelled when tested by actual war. The first instructor was kind in the short term and cruel in the long term. The second appeared cruel in the short term and proved kind in the long term. The kindest thing one can do for those one teaches is prepare them for what they will actually face, not shield them from it. Here, then, is the principle of calibrated challenge. Provide difficulties slightly beyond current capacity, enough to stretch, not enough to break. This requires knowing those you guide well enough to judge their current capacity accurately. What overwhelms one person merely challenges another. What challenges today may be easy tomorrow as capacity develops. The calibration must be continuous, adjusted as those you guide grow stronger. When those you guide face difficulty, resist the urge to rescue them. Support their capacity to handle difficulty rather than removing difficulty from their path. Be present without being interventionist. Let them struggle whilst ensuring they know they are not alone. The parent who rushes to solve every problem produces a child who cannot solve problems. The mentor who removes every obstacle produces a protege who cannot overcome obstacles. Remember also the power of example. How you handle your own difficulties teaches those watching more than any words you speak. When you meet setback with equanimity, you demonstrate that equanimity is possible. When you extract lessons from failure, you show that failure can instruct. When you persist through discouragement, you prove that persistence works. Model in your own conduct the principles you wish to transmit. After those you guide face difficulty, help them process the experience. What did they learn? What would they do differently? How has this prepared them for future challenges? This debrief consolidates learning that might otherwise be lost. The experience alone teaches little. The examined experience teaches much. Your role is to help those you guide examine what they have experienced and extract its wisdom. I reveal now the ultimate fruit of the journey we have undertaken: freedom from fear. Not freedom from feeling fear. That is impossible and would be dangerous if achieved. But freedom from being controlled by fear. When you have made peace with suffering, when you know from experience that you can bear what comes and grow from it, fear loses its stranglehold on your choices. You become free in a way that those who flee from difficulty can never be free. I recall the peculiar calm that descended upon me in May 1940, when by any rational analysis the situation was hopeless. France falling, the Channel our only barrier, our army retreating to the beaches of Dunkirk. Lesser men might have sought terms with Hitler. I felt instead a curious serenity, not denial of danger, but freedom from fear's dominion. I had already faced ruin at Gallipoli, exile in the wilderness, the death of my daughter. What remained that I had not already faced? This freedom to act without fear's constraint made possible decisions that fear would have forbidden. Consider what fear costs you. Most of what you fear never occurs, yet you pay the price of fearing it regardless. Fear is an expensive tax on experience that rarely delivers commensurate value. The meeting that terrifies you beforehand proves manageable when it arrives. The conversation you dread produces resolution rather than catastrophe. The risk that paralyzes you in anticipation becomes merely another problem solved once you engage it. Fear lies about consequences. Review your own history of meeting difficulty. You are still here. You survived everything you feared would destroy you. The evidence of your own life demonstrates that you can bear what comes. Yet fear refuses to acknowledge this evidence. Fear insists that the next difficulty will be the one that breaks you, despite all prior difficulties having failed to do so. Fear is not rational. Fear is not predictive. Fear is a liar. When facing feared outcomes, ask yourself, if the worst happens, then what? Follow the chain. Usually the answer is, I would adapt, endure, and eventually recover. Once you have genuinely accepted the worst case, fear of it diminishes. You have already survived it, in imagination. The actual event, should it occur, becomes merely the confirmation of what you have already processed. Fear thrives in inaction and withers in action. When fear speaks loudest, act, not recklessly, but purposefully. Action breaks fear's spell. Passivity perpetuates it. The soldier who charges forward feels less fear than the soldier who cowers in the trench, though the former faces greater danger. Movement itself is medicine against fear. This freedom cannot be taken from you once achieved. External circumstances may change, difficulties may multiply, losses may accumulate, but your freedom from fear's control remains yours. It is the one possession that no enemy can confiscate, no reversal can diminish. It is, in the truest sense, the freedom that cannot be taken. I elevate our vision now from individual development to civilizational destiny, for the principles we have examined govern not merely personal fate, but collective survival. Nations, like individuals, grow through suffering productively embraced and decline through suffering fearfully avoided. Every great civilization was forged in struggle and dissolved in comfort. The pattern repeats with such consistency across history that we may treat it as natural law. Consider Rome. Roman hardihood was legendary during the centuries of struggle. Farmers who laid down their plows to take up swords, senators who lived simply whilst building an empire, soldiers who endured hardships that would break modern men. This hardihood was not inherited, but developed through constant challenge. Then came the comforts of empire, and with comfort came softness. By the end, Romans hired barbarians to fight their battles because they themselves had lost the will and capacity to fight. The barbarians did not defeat Rome. They merely occupied the space Rome's softness had created. This is the pattern. Civilizations do not die by conquest. They die by comfort and are then conquered. The external enemy merely administers the final blow to a patient already dying of internal causes. I observe in our own time the symptoms of civilizational illness, the worship of comfort, the demand for safety from all unpleasantness, the equation of challenge with oppression. These are not merely individual failings, but cultural trends that, if uncorrected, guarantee collective decline. A civilization that cannot bear difficulty cannot defend itself against those who can. A generation that has not learned to endure will not stand when the storm arrives. There is a cycle I have observed. Hard times create strong people. Strong people create good times. Good times create weak people. Weak people create hard times. The cycle can be broken only by those who maintain capacity for hardship even during times of ease. Such people are the antibodies of civilization, preserving strength when conditions do not demand it, ensuring that when conditions change, capacity remains. Your individual transformation is therefore not merely personal development, it is political act and civilizational service. By developing your own capacity for difficulty, you contribute to collective capacity. By transmitting this capacity to those you influence, you extend the chain across generations. Civilizations are composed of individuals. Civilizational strength is the aggregate of individual strengths. You are not merely improving yourself. You are preserving something larger than yourself. Do not despair at cultural trends you cannot directly control. Change what you can change: yourself, those you guide, the institutions you influence. These changes aggregate. They ripple outward. History has been altered more than once by small groups of committed individuals who refuse to accept decline as inevitable. Be one such individual. The stakes could not be higher. We come now to the end of our journey together, though what ends here is merely the reading. The living of these truths continues for the remainder of your days. I offer now the deepest understanding and the greatest invitation, the final truth that encompasses all that has come before, and the ongoing practice that transforms understanding into being. Here is what I have come to believe through decades of war and peace, triumph and disaster, love and loss. The universe is not designed for our comfort. It is designed for our development. Suffering is not evidence against benevolent order, but the necessary condition under which conscious creatures can become more than they began. The child given everything remains always a child. The soul given everything remains always small. Growth requires resistance. Character requires difficulty. Strength requires the fire. This view offers neither easy comfort nor grim resignation. It does not deny that suffering hurts. Of course it hurts. That is precisely the point. It does not pretend that all suffering leads to growth. Suffering poorly met leads only to more suffering. But it offers something more valuable than comfort. It offers meaning. And meaning, I have found, can carry a man through darkness that mere pleasure-seeking never could. I have stood at history's hinge points and watched empires fall. I have held power and lost it and held it again. I have buried a child and faced my own mortality in the depths of the black dog's darkness. And I tell you now, at the end of this work, I would not have had it otherwise. Not because suffering is pleasant. It is not, and anyone who claims otherwise is either lying or deranged. But because the life that emerges from suffering productively met is incomparably richer than the life that has known only ease. The invitation I extend is not to enjoy suffering. That would be perverse. The invitation is to embrace the life that necessarily includes suffering, to say yes to existence in its fullness rather than demanding a sanitized version that cannot exist. This is the highest achievement. Not tolerance of existence, but gratitude for it, suffering and all. This is the final transformation, from one who endures to one who embraces. The practice that remains is the practice of a lifetime. Continue the work begun in these pages. Apply the principles in every domain. When difficulty arrives, meet it with the understanding you have developed. When others struggle, offer what guidance you can. When you fail, and you will fail, apply the lessons of failure and continue. Mastery is not a destination but a direction. There is no point at which you arrive and the work is done. The journey continues until it ends. Never give in. Never, 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 in nothing great or small, large or petty, never give in except to convictions of honor and good sense. But learn also to see that the very forces which seem to demand your surrender are rightly understood, the forces that can make you free. That is the final secret. That is what I have lived to tell you. That is the truth that suffering taught me and that I now pass to you. Go and live accordingly.